Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for another one of my top 10 album countdown lists from a particular year, and this time I'm tackling 2014. This is hot on the heels, of course, of my top 10 albums of 2015 list, which I put up in January. So 2014 for me personally, or at least in my life, it doesn't stand out as necessarily a year that I thought was particularly great, nor was it a particularly bad year either. It was just kind of so-so and in between. It's not a year that stands out in my memory anyway. I think musically though, there were some really good albums, some genuine dark horse releases that year that are sort of now hidden gems in a way. I don't necessarily think though that this year was as good as 2015, the list I last put up on the channel, because there was just something about 2015 that was kind of magic for me, and the albums were just so many. There were just so many top-notch releases in that year. It's just a hard one to beat. But don't take that away from this particular year. I just think there were some really good albums, and I'm going to go through these on this list. We're going to start though with a few honourable mentions, as I did in my last album countdown list. So let's crack on with this list and start with my first honourable mention, which is Arch Enemy's War Eternal, the first album to feature Alissa White-Gluz on vocals after the departure of Angela Gurcel. And I think that this album, it's a little bit of a dark horse maybe. I think it's a very solid album. I do think the singles have always stood out more for me than a lot of the other tracks on this particular release for whatever album. I think the guitar work though is generally pretty tight throughout the album. And just overall, I think it's a solid album that I'd quite willingly revisit now and then. So Arch Enemy's War Eternal is my first honourable mention. My next honourable mention is Elverti and Origins. And I saw Elverti the following year live. I think they were supporting Epica, as I recall, and I really enjoyed them as a live band. And actually I saw them again live not long ago, a year or two ago I think, and thought they were equally as good, if not even better, in that performance. They are a band that have grown on me over the years, and I do like their folk metal style. This was actually the last album with long-time members in the bands like Anna Murphy. But I do really like this album. I think it was worth the honourable mention. It's one I just kind of enjoy. I really enjoy songs like King and Call of the Mountain. So it's another album I wanted to give an honourable mention to. That's Elverti and Origins. My next honourable mention is Opeth and Pale Communion, as they delve deeper into the realms of 70s prog with this album. But I just think this is a really intelligent and well put together album from Opeth. The more you listen to it, the more it sort of unravels before you, and you discover more interesting things about it. At least that's my experience with Pale Communion. So yeah, I thought I'd give this one an honourable mention for my 2014 top 10 list. That's Opeth, Pale Communion. Another album I want to give an honourable mention to is Alcest Shelter. This saw the band go full shoegaze in that year, having released before it more atmospheric black metal style albums, at least that I can recall that I've listened to before they went full shoegaze in 2014. I just really love this album. I think it's great. I just, as a shoegaze lover, it's absolutely up my street. Not everybody would enjoy this, certainly not if you want to hear more of the atmospheric melodic black metal stuff that they've done before. But I still think that this was a really good album from that year, and it deserves the shout out. My last and final honourable mention from 2014, before we get on to my top 10, this goes to Crowbar and Symmetry in Black, a sludge metal album that I listened to a lot that year. But interestingly, once we kind of left 2014, I didn't really go back to it so much. This does have an amazing opening song on it. It really does, called Walk With Knowledge Wisely, and I absolutely loved the hell out of that track that year. I can remember just playing it over and over again. And yeah, I like this Crowbar album. I guess sludge metal is a genre, once I get into it, I get really into it, but then if I dip out of it, I don't go back to it for a while. It's a weird relationship I have with sludge metal stuff. But I remember really digging Crowbar that year. So we're going to start my top 10 now. And my number 10 is Mastodon, Once More Around the Sun. This saw the band continuing to go into territory of, space rock and psychedelic sounding rock. And I thought that, again, it was a really solid album. Mastodon are a band with no bad albums. I mean, you may want to contest that, but I think Once More Around the Sun is still a really good album. And I have to admit this, it's might be my least favourite album from Mastodon, but as a huge Mastodon fan, it still made number 10 from a year-end list, because I still think that it's a really good album. And it has cuts on like Diamond in the Witch House, like I Love, which actually sort of leans back towards more of their extreme metal style, that song. And it just has really accessible songs, very, very catchy stuff on here that you'll enjoy if you like catchy, slightly weird sounding stuff, but it's really cool. I really enjoy Mastodon's Once More Around the Sun, even though it's actually one of my less preferred albums from Mastodon. Okay, it's coming up at number 9 now. We've got Killer Be Killed's self-titled album. Not one for supergroups personally, but this supergroup I can definitely get behind. You know, you've got Greg Puciato in this band. You've got Max Cavalera, Troy Sanderson of the aforementioned Mastodon, Ben Coller on the drums. It's just an absolutely awesome lineup. And, you know, usually that doesn't always work when you've got so much talent or, you know, so many star players in a team, in a band, in a lineup, but for this album it just worked. The heavy riffs are sick as all hell. I absolutely love Snakes of Jehovah, the song on this. I think it was a single. Incredible track. The way, the kind of just that sort of, the way that riff just blows up in your face is just awesome in that song. And it's an album with other great cuts on like IED as well. This is just a really solid supergroup release. And Killer Be Killed's self-titled album was a great one from 2014. That's my number 9, Killer Be Killed, self-titled. Number 8 is Warpaint and their self-titled album from that year. Warpaint, if you don't know them, they are an all-women indie rock band that I have been very much a fan of for a long time. I think actually though this might have been the album I discovered them through. And maybe, yes, I do love the debut album a touch more than this, but this is still a great album, and I think it's one that, you know, was a little bit sort of got some mixed reviews that year at least. I think Pitchfork gave it quite a negative review, if I remember rightly. But for me, even though this album sort of experiments quite a bit and it has some quirky stretches of music, which are kind of unusual for me, but I think it's actually, when you listen to this album more and more, it sort of really grows on you. And there are still some really memorable songs. I mean, you've got To Love Is To Die, I think is the name of the track. You've got Sun, the album closer, which is just a stunning album finisher. There's lots of really, really great cuts on the Warpaint self-titled album. And yeah, I think it's an awesome Warpaint release, even though, you know, maybe slightly prefer the debut album. I think their first 2 albums actually are great. So if you don't know Warpaint, do go and check them out. They're a great band with some great songs. So my number 7 now we're moving on to is Anathema and Distant Satellites. So for me, again, one of the more underrated albums in this band's discography. I really, really love the vocal arrangements that Anathema have in this sort of era of their music. I mean, they just have this amazing blend of vocal harmonies and this sort of build-ups of these, you know, really kind of repeating but very, very engaging instrumental passages. And in this album, it kind of just, it's a great exposition of a lot, for me, of Anathema's real talents, particularly with the singing department. And yeah, I just think that Vincent just sounds amazing on this album. It's just a really, really underrated Anathema gem from that year. So we move on to my number 6, a band on this that I feel like I maybe mentioned too many times actually on this channel at the moment. This is I Break Horses with their second album, Chiaroscuro. This album is sort of more full-on electronic synth pop and dance pop all combined, and I think it's actually fantastic. I really love this album. I don't understand. This album definitely is one that I've seen some negative reviews for, I think, and yet it's an album that I personally think has a huge amount of replay value. For me, I find the textures used and the sounds used very engaging. I love the way the sort of the movements of the track and the tracks sort of link into one each other for me very naturally. I just think it's an album that I really think is not one of, it's another album from this band, but isn't my favourite album from the band, but it's still got like so much replay value for me. It's another album I regularly revisit. I actually think this year I've listened to this album like about 7 or 8 times. That's just an indication of why this album is high up in my top 10 list of that year as well. I think I Break Horses Chiaroscuro is hugely underrated, and that's my number 6. Number 5 is Revocation's Breathless. Another dynamic, technical death metal album from this band, but it's pretty accessible for Revocation, I think. I do think there are lots of songs with certain structures here that don't go all over the place like some of their other songs do in other albums. It's pretty well structured, and I think it's one of the better structured Revocation albums, perhaps along with Never Heaven, their other actually very recent release from this band. But it's just an awesome album. Great groove, great riffs, everything you could want from a Revocation album. And I particularly enjoy Witch Trials on this album. I also love Madness Opus, and I think it's Labyrinth of Eyes, the name of that track. And this is an awesome album from Revocation, and that's my number 5, because we're now into my top 5 from 2014. Okay, moving swiftly on to my number 4, which is Insomnium, Shadows of the Dying Sun. And for me, I love the clear, crisp production in this Insomnium album. I feel like it's one of the most clear Insomnium albums that you can listen to, where you can hear all the elements just so perfectly balanced. And the band just sound fantastic on this album. They really do. And it's why songs like While We Sleep, I think, are so, well known now and so fantastic to listen to, because not only is it a great song, but it's just so beautifully produced. Also, shout out to Revelation and Out to the Sea. Also, I think, are fantastic melodic death metal tracks on this album. And Shadows of the Dying Sun is just another great Insomnium album, and definitely one that had to at least be in my top 5 of 2014. Now we move on to my number 3, which is an album I discovered via Coverkiller Nation, that YouTuber who I think many of you know that watch my channel. He was one of the original metal YouTubers who really started this whole list thing, I think, and doing the whole YouTube albums thing, one of the originals. And it was through him I discovered this album by Triptykon Milana Kazmata. And this is very dark, it's got Tom Warrior from Celtic Frost, and it's just pummeling stuff. I mean, it's pretty doomy, but it does also have faster passages where it's refreshingly kind of switching pace, and he even does that in a couple of tracks. And I just think that this album is an epic album from that year. This is an album that definitely got a great critical reception, I have to say, and it's just a phenomenal album, and one that I occasionally revisit. Actually, I don't maybe revisit as much as some of the other albums on this list, but I just respect this album, the hell out of this album, and I love what it does. I listened to it again today and realised, yeah, this is another really great album from that year. It has to be high on my list. So coming down number 2, we have another album which has been talked about quite recently on the channel when I did my top 10 symphonic metal albums of all time. This is Epica's Quantum Enigma, which was released, of course, in 2014. I think this is my favourite album, just from the band, possibly even just because it has lots of immediate, really memorable songs, and I think a lot of Simone's best choruses all packed into all the tracks on this album. I love the more epic cut as well, Quantum Enigma. I don't always like Epica's really long cuts, but I love the title track on this album. The 12-minute or so Quantum Enigma is just fantastic. So yeah, I've talked about this album quite a bit recently, so I won't talk too much more about it here, but Epica's Quantum Enigma is my runner-up for 2014. That's my number 2, which leaves just number 1. And if you really follow the channel closely and you really observe my lists, then you've probably guessed this. But my number 1 from 2014 is Paul Bearer's Foundations of Burden. The impact of this album on me can't be understated. It's why it's my number 1. You tend to find it's the albums that make just that bit of personal connection with you, or that you find yourself, listening to maybe the most from that year as well, actually. And I don't think I discovered this album in 2014. I think it was a year or so later that I actually came across Foundations of Burden. But boy, when I discovered this, did I realise what a special album this is and has become for me over time. And I think it's just works. And in a way, I'm sort of surprised that an album so heavy and with that big low end sound can yet pull off something which also sounds so incredibly beautiful. It's exactly what Foundations of Burden does. Love this album, love the vocals, love those melodies, and some absolutely just wonderful songs on here with some crushing riffs as well. So that's my favourite album from 2014, Paul Bearer, Foundations of Burden. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to drop a like and a sub. At this point of recording the video, I think I'm on 499 subs, so you could be that 500th subscriber to reach the channel's milestone. So thank you very much, everybody. Until next time, from me, bye for now.